Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you, obviously, to Jane and Jessica. And then thank you to Michelle and Mandy, who looked after me really well today. It's been brilliant to speak to some of you and to have a really good tour through the building and see the university. So I will talk today about my practice. And I'm originally from the south of Germany, and I trained as a jeweler and a silversmith, and then I did a master's in fine art. So in the talk, I tried to cover different aspects of my work. I've brought some samples of work, which see it as a handling collection. So after the talk, really feel free to go and touch it and handle it, look at it. It's some of the work hanging up on the wall is some of the paperwork that's in the exhibition. So obviously in the exhibition you can't touch, so feel free to just feel it. And some of it is my metalwork and a little bit of jewelry as well. So to give you a quick overview, the talk is entitled Uncertainty Squared. And I called it Uncertainty Squared because there's a little aspect within the talk at the end where I briefly cover uncertainty, but I think uncertainty very often runs through our practice as an artist at lots of different stages. And I square it because I'm slightly obsessed by the square, and it's a motif in my visual language that's really prominent, and it features and has done for a long time. The overview, very quickly, I will speak a little bit about jewelry and silversmithing, and I give you just a little bit of insight about the inspiration I've used for that, or use for it still. And then I try to let you know what made me go into a master's in fine art, coming from a more crafts-based background. Inspiration during the master's and a more contextual insight into it, my practice, and then, as promised at the end, a little bit about uncertainty. So as a jeweler silversmith, I have really tried to extend jewelry, and I've brought a piece along which is over here, because I always felt jewelry itself, although it's worn and it's important to be on the body and it can be a signifier, sometimes when it's off the body, it's hidden away and it loses its presence. So I've looked into that notion of extending it, so jewelry becoming decorative pieces. And I brought this piece along. It's called Wear and Wear. It sits on a plinth. In its real life, it sits on a slate plinth. But I've just brought the box along. And what you can do, when it's off the box, it unravels, and then it actually becomes a decorative piece of jewelry. So I won't put it on because I'm wired up, so it will all get mingled. So in that sense, I try to really look at different aspects of perception, of a playfulness, of an extension to what we normally think when we think about jewelry. And once it's worn and unraveled, it can go back afterwards onto its home again. So that aspect of transformation, really, that I already started when I was doing mainly jewelry, starts to slowly run through further aspects of my work. This piece is called Spiral. Those are functional pieces. They're basically wearable bracelets. And what I have started to do with this work, you can already see the square is prominent, and I started to actually physically cut the pieces, and I started to layer it. So I looked into architectural spaces in order to really explore an aspect of depth, the possibility to look into something, the structural quality. And really with those pieces I started to establish kind of keys of my visual language. research I've done in relation to it is I was quite fortunate to be able to go to Japan at different stages. And I would visit temples there and would go to actually explore spaces and experience spaces because I'm interested in architecture. So it was that aspect of being able to immerse myself and experience a space became really important. And this image is from a temple called Daikokuchi in Kyoto, and it was one of the main rooms where you can see that the paper screens are layered. So you get that overlapping, which I then obviously translated back into my work. You get that aspect of opening out, you get a sense of space, you get that inside aspect quality. When I was studying on the bachelor course, which I've done in Birmingham at the School of Jewelry, I did some of the work was jewelry related, but fairly early on I got much more into objects. I extended it into silversmithing work. And this is a piece that is called Floating Bowl, as the title says. And in the floating bowl I was really interested in the notion of what I can do with materials. What does the material itself give me really? And how can I make best use of the qualities? So the piece itself is the base is acrylic, and then the rods coming up is glass, and then the bowl is actually silver, but it's gold plated. It freely sits on 4 glass rods. So depending on the quality of the light and where the piece is from a distance, the rods really sometimes blend into the space itself and it becomes a floating bowl. And another aspect, obviously, with using glass, there was an element of fragility. Glass is fragile, but then it isn't. It depends on how we handle it and how you apply forces to it. So when the force is downward, obviously it's very strong. And I was using those aspects within my work to, again, challenge the perception of pieces and really to create intriguing work where it took a little bit to actually look closer and to give it a little bit of time to explore what is happening. Embrace, on the other hand, goes back to the square. And with Embrace, I was looking into the process and the process of cutting, which creating the squares. There's an image after that one that will explain what process I use. Was really about the importance of precision. I was trying to develop my craftsmanship and trying to develop my metalworking skills. And I was cutting the work and then forming it. But when you form it, the way the pieces sit, they need to be very precise in order to be able to sit inside each other. So they're 2 separate bowls. They can be taken apart and then easily just placed inside each other. And then, as you can see along here, obviously they can be moved. I was interested in contrast. Obviously craftsmanship, precision was very important. And I wanted to have that interaction between the 2 pieces because I felt that the pieces each in itself was fine, but actually putting them together, they created something much bigger. They suddenly started to relate and become something very different. And when I made this piece, I was so excited because I so liked it. And I thought, oh, this would be fabulous if it would go into a museum, which it didn't for a long time. And then one time I exhibited at the Goldsmiths Fair in London, which is a selected fair, and you're there the whole week. And Goldsmiths saw it and bought it, so it finally ended up in a collection and is regularly exhibited, which was really nice. And it kind of gave me the confidence that sometimes when we do work, we just have to be patient, really. And it doesn't always take off, even though we think it's fabulous. Sometimes people just need a little bit of time to actually see the work and appreciate the work for what it is. This is an image of the process. So when I was saying I cut the squares, I've got this press which is called the Joshi press. And you can see I cut one square at a time. So I spent hours standing at this press and I just push the lever down and then I have to push the metal or the paper, I use paper on it as well, down. So just to give you a quick insight what this mysterious thing is. Okay, another one of my objects which is called Object on Red. And with this piece, again, process was quite important. So I use traditional metalsmithing techniques, which is called raising and forming. And the piece in itself, from a technical point of view, is actually quite difficult to achieve because the material, I have a circular disc and I cut the material out in the middle. So trying to form the sides up. At the beginning, there's nothing to resist again because metal is quite resistant, which I like. So it was really quite it wasn't a fight with the material as such, as we sometimes do. It was really a dialogue with it and trying to find my way through the process in order to ultimately then achieve the piece. It's very much about the tension and the tension between the very solid aspect of the top and the much more structural quality at the bottom. When I form a material, the bottom part you can see is perfectly square, but as I raise it up on the sides, those squares really distort. And the distortion in itself I can't control. So this is an aspect that's really just quite intriguing and interesting what happens within. I brought one of the pieces along where you can later on have a good look at it and handle it to see what it was doing. Okay, a little bit more of my inspiration. I look into spatial qualities. The top image on the left is an image about from a temple in Japan, and it was lit up red, so that it was plain concrete, and it's worked by an architect called Tadao Ando, whose buildings I appreciate a lot, and his philosophy about building and architecture is very intriguing and interesting and very much in tune with spaces, and I get the sense he really understands what he's trying to do within the area. So fabulous place to visit. And then the other two images on the right hand side, I was interested in the very industrial quality of the grid and that aspect of it leads somewhere, but you can't quite figure out where it goes. So you need to let yourself in for that next step, really. Bottom left is about the layers and the depths of spaces. Another building by this architect I just mentioned, Tadao Ando, are those three images, and it's called the Church of Light. And the work is it's a Catholic church, and it's in a suburban district just outside of Osaka. It's quite a small church, but it's beautiful. It's that what I've said early on, that immersing oneself in a space when you do research, when you go, so you don't just look at it on the screen in flat, but really go and experience the space, smell it, kind of feel how it feels. And I'd studied the church when I was studying in books, and I felt I knew it really well because I had looked at it and I had read about it. But then actually being there was amazing. It was so enveloping. The space is so calm and beautiful, and it's really, really subtle, but yet it's very symbolic. So as you go on the left side there, down here, he has used 12 steps, so he works with the symbolism, obviously, of the apostles. You have the 12 apostles in the Catholic Church. Then he just kept it really plain. The concrete is very smooth, and then he just breaks open this massive concrete wall and lets the light in through cross. And what you do is suddenly you bring the outside in and you open the space up, and when you're in there, you actually, the way the light travels, suddenly the whole atmosphere within the building changes, and you get a real sense of being inside but being outside as well at the same time. So it's really, it's an intriguing space. I was quite, you possibly can tell, I was quite absorbed being there. So, that was at the time after I had visited the spaces where I was involved in, or I got selected for a project which was called Future Forward 2. And it was a mentorship program by, it wasn't Craft Space, it was, can't remember, I'll let you know later. And I had been selected to become a mentee. So I had to do a write-up about what I would want to achieve being a mentee, paired up with somebody who was obviously there to support me. And part of it was I really wanted to work in relation to architecture. I wanted to create work that, as it says, that was for defined purposes. And I was thinking, this is something I really want to get into, and I want to broaden my practice. So, and it was quite important that it's places for contemplation, worship or healing, because I felt those are spaces where we take a moment of time and we actually, we cut the outside, we leave the noise outside, and we are ourselves really, and we can look inward instead of being driven by the outside. So that is an aspect I'm still interested in, but I formulated that saying in 2010. And then I was fortunate to, as part of this mentorship program, I realized that it's important to be proactive, because up till then I always waited for opportunities to arise, or I saw an event and I would write to it or try to take part in competitions. But with the project that's on here, which was an invitation to put in a proposal for St George's Hospital in London, I approached the art director of the hospital because I was interested in it. That was that aspect of actually, I wanted to do work for places of contemplation and healing. So I thought actually this is a good aspect to get in touch. And I then subsequently was invited to put a proposal in for this commission that was coming up, because they built a new centre, and I proposed a set. I proposed a set of 3 images that were then subsequently wall mounted. They are paper pieces. They work with the square, and they basically describe a journey in the form of a triptych. So they move from a very regular motion into something much more dynamic and then gently end up again. Why I choose the rhythm was, and why I tried to keep it very calm in some ways, was because it was going onto the wall of this area, so in a very busy reception space, and it was important to create work that just allowed, almost like or invited a difference into what was happening in there. So once I had achieved the work for places I wanted to do for public spaces and site-specific work, I was just thinking, what comes next? What do I want to do? And I realized I was very much steeped with my thinking in a more craft-based area. So I decided to actually apply for masters, and because I wanted a challenge to break out and to open my practice, and I really wanted to expose myself to a different way of thinking. So I applied to the masters in Birmingham, and I was offered the space, and I was fortunate enough that I got a scholarship for my studies by the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Trust, which obviously made the time of studying much easier, because I didn't have to worry so much about financial constraints, because the scholarship was big enough for that. So I actually then right at the beginning, I started to research into the light and space movement of the West Coast with John Irwin's work and James Turrell, and I'm intrigued by the work. I think it's very beautiful, it's deceptive, it's again, it's an immersive quality when you're there, and similar with Olafur Eliasson's work when it was down in the Tate Modern. I don't know if some of you went there, but I thought it was quite intriguing to be in the space. But I very quickly realized, the more I looked at it and started to think about it, that actually they work with so ephemeral materials like light, and it wasn't, I couldn't keep going for my own work in that direction. I realized I needed a hands-on. I'm more of a person who needs materials, and I need a process to. So although this has helped me a lot to think about space and to see what is possible, really, it didn't really drive me in that direction to work with light in a similar way or in that sense. So in one aspect I decided, okay, I go back to much more material based, but I was still interested in broadening the thinking. And Joseph Beuys, who I'm sure most of you have come across or know about, is actually the person that inspired a lot of my thinking ultimately. And Joseph Beuys obviously was a German artist who, as said, lived from 1921 till 86, and he coined the term that everybody's an artist. And it wasn't so much that he was saying everybody does really amazing work. It was much more about the aspect that everybody has really a creative potential, and this creative aspect within ourselves is very important, because what it allows us is really to break free of constraints. So he proposed, he broke open encrusted structures to a certain extent within the German art scene, and ultimately I think he has been influential in a much wider sense. But he proposed that we don't just need to use artistic materials, that actually art can go much further. So he was saying there are invisible materials that everybody can use, like, thinking or speaking is a form of art. He did quite a lot of work where he did actually discussions with students, because he was professor at the Academy in Düsseldorf until he got dismissed. He was a bit too radical at some point. So he was an activist in some ways, and he was really engaged with social change. Ultimately, he wanted people to really be empowered and draw from their own knowledge and draw from their own ability. So the term of social sculpture really was coined, and with social sculpture he means, or what he implied, that everybody in the society really, should take part in that forming the community, taking responsibility, and bringing out their creative potential. And it was funny, because thinking about it over, or when I knew about the talk and I was thinking over it again, I was thinking, actually, almost right now it seems even more important than at any other time, considering what happens in the political scene at the moment, where I think, as creative beings, we have the power, and I think it's important to go for it and put our marks down and be engaged. So I think Joseph Beuys in some ways really, yes, as I said, opened up. The writing on the image there, on the poster, says, with the end of contemporary art, art can start. And what he really was implying there was that art has to be broader than just in galleries. It has to actually come out of the white walls. It's not that it can't be there, but it shouldn't be confined to it. So, it should really go into a much broader arena in some ways. And this creative potential really is down, or bringing out the creative potential is really the responsibility of each of us and of each individual. So it's down to us to push for it and to allow it to happen. Because in boys' opinion, and I agree with that, that is actually, you know, we are, as human beings, there's so many facets to us, and in some ways not allowing that potential to come forward, we don't live life to the whole. Okay, enough preaching. Just one I quickly speak through that, because a project he did, which is called 7,000 Oaks, and I thought was illustrating quite well what boys tried to achieve, where he was really trying to plant, and ultimately it happened, 7,000 oaks as part of the Documenta, which is an exhibition in Kassel. And he called it Stadtverwaltung statt Stadtverwaltung, which basically says, it's a word game in German, so a word play. And it's basically again hinting at that, to take responsibility, to engage and to make things happen. And he uses the stone columns, the basalt columns, to symbolize really the static quality. And he was talking about the ecological devastation that happens through the means of production, that happen within a capitalist system. So he was really trying to get people into action, to make them, to make them go for a greater belief. And so with each of the columns, a tree was planted. Tree obviously is for change, for transformation, for life. And the column in itself is a marker. And that project has actually been finally concluded in 1986. So just after boys had died, but it happened, and different cities took on aspects of it. So there are some of the trees in New York, I think there's some in Oslo, so it has gone out into different areas. Okay, now, so this was a bit of the backdrop I was then researching in while I did the Masters. So briefly, what was I trying to do with the work, and really, and still trying to do it. It's an ongoing process. It's not like I do one thing and then it's finished. It's really very, very slowly develops and progresses. So the aim was really to produce work of a profound nature, where the individual can connect with and respond to the work on a deeper personal level and in a meaningful way. That goes back to that aspect of finding places, doing work in response to places of worship and healing, and allowing us, or creating a space where we can just be for a moment. And I would quite like people to perhaps be touched by the work, to be able to perhaps associate things. The work could be, or hopefully for some people might become, a trigger element. So because all of those aspects, I feel, actually allow us to or bring us back into the present, bring us back to where we are. Then I wanted the work to be quiet, and sometimes it is, not always, I think. But yeah, to be really in some ways. Then and those areas really relate to that thought about who are we as human beings, what is our goal in life. And I suppose that's my interest in the spiritual aspect of life as well. So those would mark the question marks there. Then I found this quote by Ludwig Wittgenstein, which was saying that work on philosophy, like work in architecture or art, I put that in many respects, is really work on oneself, one's own interpretation on how we see things. Might resonate with you, it might not. And now, work I have done during the masters was I went from small silversmithing objects into much larger scale. And I started with paper because paper allowed me to be a bit freer. It was less precious than metal. It allowed me to work a tiny little bit quicker. And I was still working with some formal aspects. So I worked with repetition. I cut out the spaces within there. So I was looking at that element of transformation. I tried, when I work with the press, I tried to go into a rhythm. So I feel my work through the materials, and I was challenged by the scale, so I had to suddenly think of how do I actually show work, how can I display it, and how can I perhaps intrigue it, so in making it more intriguing. So the work before, once it's lit up, you get that sense of, the light is not so good, but this starts to light. It's lit from above, but when this layer is broken through, you suddenly come into that inside layer where it's a lot about depths. And I've done an explanation, a write-up, which I quickly read to you. The piece is called Within, and Within explores the notion that there is more than meets the eye at first sight. Within the voluminous form, material becomes deceptive. Absence creates presence, thus space reveals itself. An invitation to journey through the layers into depths. So I wanted people to really explore, to be there, to be with the work for a little bit. And the closer you came, the more you could actually see into it, and you realized there were different elements happening within the work. Oculus 365 worked on do we perceive the world, and very often we perceive it mainly by looking, and so I used contact lenses and sandwiched them. And sandwiched them. So in each of the metal frames, there is actually a sandwich contact lens, and really what I was interested in was to create an awareness of how we see, and I wanted people to perhaps move beyond just that vision focus quality, and it's ultimately became a sculpture. This is the setting up of the work. So it became very much a repetition of the unit, and it was about the physical engagement, and then it was important to actually bring it into scale. So on the top there, I very much worked in a jewelry sense because I wanted it to be really precise and work with that. So the layers were all, it was a little bit obsessive, the layers were all straight because it needed that ability to look into it. And then ultimately it became a hanging sculpture. Okay, now the next piece is called Lifeline, and I was selected to be a part of a project which was called Next Wave. That in Birmingham there's a gallery called RBSA, Royal Birmingham RBS, Society of Artists Gallery now, and it tends to be, it's a gallery that works with members, and they try to shake it up a little bit and introduce new things, new projects. So there was a call out to recent graduates, which I was as a mature student, to develop work, and my work was selected, and I made this piece which is called Lifelines, and I started very much with formal concerns again. I used the cutting, I used paper, it's Japanese paper, and then it's layered, and it's suspended on a metal frame. It's 2.20 meters tall, so it was a lot of time spent on the press, pulling down the lever, trying to really respond to the material, trying to just let go, just be really, getting into that meditative, intuitive quality. There's a line running along here that's unbroken up to about here, and that I felt it kind of, it needed that quality of development, of movement, of opening up. When you, the sculpture itself is very, it's not transparent really because there are quite a lot of layers, but it's quite open, so it invites really, it invites a bit of a search when you work with it. And what I wanted ultimately was really, I wanted the viewers to engage with it, and it happened to a point. Okay, now the last piece in the series of the papers was, because I worked so clear and strict and tried to stay within the limits, this piece called Fleece then totally broke out of it, and it allowed me to just be really free, to the point that it almost looks like a piece of work of destruction. So I work with layers of newsprint, which I do in the piece that will be in the exhibition next door as well. But with that work, I just try to, it's more forceful. I just try to be quicker. I try to be more active with it. And obviously areas start to really break up. There's an element of almost decay down here. It forces down. And yeah, it's a different expression of a different quality, really. The work was selected for a paper triennial in the museum in Deckendorf in Germany, which was really nice to be able to actually send it back home to Germany and then go and see it there. And because it's quite a well known exhibition by now. So far to the paperwork, the last piece in terms of the work I want to talk about is a piece called Urban. It's a candle holder, and I was going back to metalwork again because I still work within all three areas. And Urban is at the moment shown at the Victoria and Albert Museum. There's an exhibition called Idea to Object. And what I was looking into was really, you know, what happens in contemporary society and how do we communicate. And I feel and felt that it's very, communication is so important, and what spaces are for communication. And for me, it's the kitchen table. It's sitting together, eating, or the dinner table, eating with people. And hence I decided to make a piece for the dinner table and make a functional piece, and in this sense a candle holder. So it works with in the aesthetic, a similar aesthetic I'm using, or that runs through my work. There's two layers. The outer layer is silver cut out, and then the inner layer is solid but highly polished. So when you look at the work, you actually get lots of reflections, and in some ways, looking at it, you become part of the work as well, because it reflects back, but then it's deceptive because you can't quite tell if you're actually looking through or if it's just lots of layers. So that's still, the show is still on till next year, so that was nice to have work in the V&A. Now, so far to my work. If you have any question, a couple more thoughts about uncertainty and then I'm done. Reflecting on uncertainty, and as I have mentioned before, I feel that it's really, in all of my creative process, it's something that kind of bubbles up and it's there, and I get slightly panicky, and then suddenly I overcome it, or I work with it. And so I tried to visualize it, and I thought that first step of uncertainty is really like being in a black space, not knowing where to go. I don't quite, I don't see the light. But the more I actually acquaint myself with it and let it happen, suddenly there's a little bit of light coming in. I possibly get a bit more confidence. I go and do research, and so with gaining a little bit more understanding of what's happening, I think step by step we actually, I can only speak of myself, I start to to really open up, understand more, and I think ultimately gain much more trust and know it will be fine till the next time when uncertainty bubbles up again. I don't know if you all know, you all being creatives, you possibly all know about that and have been in these places. And I realized that when I was a student, I thought once I'm not a student anymore, thank heaven that will be done, but it won't. As a practitioner, I still encounter it. And I think ultimately it is quite a driving force, and I feel that perhaps we need to embrace it and embrace those times when we feel like, uncertainty. We're hitting a wall, don't know where to go, but trust is very important, and knowing that actually, yes, there will be light at the other side of the tunnel again. A quote that very much in relation to me captures that quality is by Apollinaire, and it reads, "I come to the edge," he said. They said, "We're afraid." "Come to the edge," he said. They came, he pushed them and they flew. So hopefully you all allow that push now and then and you can fly. And that's it. That's the end. And here's my website. Thank you very much.